Beyond His Story We Stand presents Saint Patrick, the Apostle of the Green Isle. Written by M. McGilbourne. Performed by Killian Brooks. A story rooted in real history, alive with real people, set in a real world. This story is yours now. It always was.
Chapter 1. The World Before the Sea. May the road rise to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face. The rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of His hand. The empire was old, and it knew it. You could feel the knowledge in the stones themselves, in the Roman roads that still ran straight and purposeful through the hill country of Western Britain, cutting across Celtic farmland with the geometric certainty of men who had once believed the world would always bend to their geometry. The roads were cracking now. Weeds split the fitted stones in spring, and in the hard winters that had come more frequently since the legions thinned, frost opened the cracks wider still, so that the great engineering of 100 years past was being unmade, slowly and without apology, by the ordinary violence of weather. Farmers whose grandfathers had cursed the Roman road builders now walked those same roads with a quiet unease, sensing that something large and invisible was shifting behind the clouds of history, though they had no words for what they sensed and so said nothing, and planted their barley and watched the grey western sea. Patricius had lived his entire life at the edge of that sea. He was 16 in the spring that everything ended, and on the last ordinary morning of his childhood, he stood on the slope behind his father's villa and watched the water change colour as the sun cleared the hills behind him. Black to pewter to a pale, reluctant silver, the Irish Sea lying flat and enormous under the early light, stretching westward toward a horizon that hid the island the local traders called Hibernia, and the sailors called something darker and less nameable. The cold came off the water even in May. It always did. Patricius had grown up with that cold as a kind of constant companion, an invisible presence that followed him from the shore to the villa's courtyard, slipping through the gaps in his wool cloak no matter how he pulled it close. Below him the household was waking. The villa was modest by the standards of the southern provinces. No painted dining hall, no elaborate garden colonnades, but solid and warm, built in the Roman fashion with thick plastered walls and a hypocaust that circulated warm air beneath the stone floor of the main rooms during the worst of winter. His father Calpurnius kept it in good repair, as a man of his station was expected to do. Calpurnius was a decurion, a minor official of the local administration, and also a deacon of the church, a combination that struck no one in the household as contradictory, since in the Britain of that age, religion and civic duty had folded themselves together so thoroughly that separating them would have been like separating the warp threads from the weft in a finished cloth. The family prayed, the family paid taxes. These were not different obligations. From the slope, Patricius watched the kitchen slave, a dark-haired woman named Branna, whose origins were British and whose Latin was limited to the names of vegetables and the word no, carry a clay pot across the courtyard toward the outdoor bread oven. The smell reached him a moment later. Smoke, barley, the faintly sour note of the starter that had been alive in that kitchen longer than he had been alive anywhere. Bread in the morning. It was one of the few certainties left in the world. He came down the slope with the loose, unhurried walk of a boy who has not yet learned that morning's end. The market at the town below the villa was held on the 5th day of each week, and Patricius had attended it so many times that he could navigate it blind, which he sometimes did as a game, closing his eyes and allowing the sounds and smells to map the stalls in sequence. The iron and sweat smell of the blacksmith's corner, the sharp cutting smell of tanned leather from the cobbler's awning, the warm animal smell of the livestock pens, where a farmer from 3 valleys over arrived before dawn every market day with 2 goats and an expression of absolute suspicion toward all potential beers. The sweet, slightly rotten smell of the fruit stall in summer and the absence of that smell in winter, replaced by dried herbs and smoked fish laid out on boards of pale wood. Today was market day. He walked the road with a Tigernack, the son of a neighbouring farmer, a tall, gap-toothed boy of 17 who had recently begun wearing his hair in the Celtic fashion rather than the Roman crop, a small act of cultural allegiance that had caused his father 3 days of cold silence.
My father says the garrison at the fort is leaving, Tigernach said. Leaving for where? Gaul, maybe, or south. He doesn't know, just leaving.
Patricius considered this. The fort had been there since his grandfather's time, its stone walls visible from the hill road, its soldiers a constant, unremarkable presence. Men who played dice, bought bread, occasionally started fights at the tavern near the river crossing, and in their collective, mundane existence formed a kind of guarantee. Not a guarantee of safety exactly, but of continuity, of the Empire's ongoing intention to remain.
When? Patricius asked. Tigernach shrugged. Before harvest, he thinks.
They walked in silence for a moment, listening to the road. At the market, the town gathered in its usual noisy, provisional democracy. A wool merchant from the east displayed his bolts on a wooden frame, the cloth dyed in pale yellows and greens that had faded slightly in transport but were still finer than anything made locally. 2 women in British dress, heavy wool cloaks pinned at the shoulder with bronze, examined the cloth with their fingers and discussed it in Brittonic, the old language that Patricius understood imperfectly and spoke barely at all, having been raised in a household where Latin was the tongue of civilization and Brittonic was what you used with the farm hands and the old women who came to the door with herbs to sell. His grandfather Potitus was there, as he always was on market day, standing near the well at the centre of the square and speaking to whoever paused long enough to be spoken to. Potitus was a priest, older than the villa, it sometimes seemed, older than the road, a small bent man with white hair and the kind of face that has been fully inhabited by a long life, every year of it visible in the lines around his eyes. He had a habit of touching people on the arm when he spoke to them, a gentle, insistent contact, as though the words alone were not sufficient and something had to pass between his hand and their sleeve. He saw Patricius and raised a hand.
Maewyn.
His grandfather alone used the old name, the name his mother had given him before the Latin form took over, before the world of the Empire claimed him with its renaming habit. Patricius crossed the square.
You ate?
Patricius asked. Bread.
Only bread? In the cold.
The old man smiled.
The cold doesn't count.
Around them the market moved in its ancient rhythm. The haggling voices, the crying of a small child near the grain stall, the distant hammering from the blacksmith's corner, a dog that had obtained half a fish by unclear means and was now being pursued by the fishmonger's apprentice with a righteous and futile energy. Patricius stood beside his grandfather and watched it all with the mild, unexamined pleasure of a boy who does not yet know he is memorizing. The soldiers are leaving, he said. Potitus was quiet for a moment. A woman paused to touch his sleeve, and he answered her in Brittonic, nodding before turning back to his grandson. "Yes," he said simply.
And then?
The old priest looked west, toward the sea that was not visible from here but was always present, always making itself felt in the cold of the air and the salt on the lips of anyone who stood still long enough. "Then we find out," Potitus said, "what we are made of." Patricius looked west with him. He saw nothing unusual. The sky was grey and ordinary, and the sea somewhere behind it was flat and silver and old. And on the other side of that sea, though he did not know it yet and could not have imagined it,
Was everything that remained of his life.